This is An Infinite Path, spoken word essays by Niles Heckman, some of which go on to become our documentary short subject films, half of which release freely here through the podcast, all of which can be found through your support at nilesheckman.com. We used to think that all mainstream media, owned by large corporations, had become rubbish, and most, if not all, alternate media was way better. The 4 very long years of the Rump administration showed us 2 things. First, that alternate media can be just as bad, if not worse, than mainstream media, and also that much of alternate media is really just about politics in disguise. So hence our deciding to speak more upfront with our political philosophy in recent essays instead of speaking more, shall we say, in code regarding. Politics is a set of activities that are associated with the making of decisions in groups or other forms of power relations between individuals, such as the distribution of resources. Being down in the weeds of political commentary has not been in the past, nor will continue to be in the future, a high priority in our work, for politics always seems to track some of the lowest common denominator thought, which is ultra watered down on top of even more watered down in order to appeal to the general public. But since the most regressive elements of society are always attempting to sink their talons deeper into the political discourse, you also can't be a New Age snowflake meditating on a rock in Sedona, Arizona, who's completely non-politically active. Then you're no good to us as a shared community who needs those on the forefront of thought and spirit to be electing or even better, directly helping to make a country's rules. For laws that are passed do have massive effect on the body populace. Although we always try and speak to a global audience, this essay will highlight an underlying theme we've noticed through the United States of America, which only seems to be splinter amplifying, and speak about it from hopefully a more zoomed out approach, highlighting a trait of this land, which a large percentage of its culture somewhat negatively radiates out to other countries, talking about the effects and then talking about the cause. Here's the wonderful comedian Bill Hicks, who left us way too early to set it up.
Yeah, I've noticed a certain anti-intellectualism going around this country, man, ever since around 1980. Coincidentally enough. I was in Nashville, Tennessee last week, and after the show I went to a Waffle House, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm eating and I'm reading a book. I don't know anybody, I'm alone. I'm eating and I'm reading a book. And this waitress comes over to me. "What's you reading for?" I said, "Wow, I've never been asked that. Not what am I reading, but what am I reading for?" Well, God damn it, you stumped me. I guess I read for a lot of reasons, but the main one is so I don't end up being a fucking waffle waitress. Yeah, that'd be real high on the list. Then this trucker in the next booth gets up, stands over me and goes, "Well, looks like we got ourselves a reader." Well, what the fuck's going on? Like I walked into a Klan rally in a Boy George costume or something. Am I stepping out of some intellectual closet here? I read. There, I said it.
So one of the problems in the realm of Earth within the twilight days of American empire is a lack of intellect of the country's public citizenry, as evident in the continual lack of reading of longer form print-based text. Even the orange clown, Ronald McDonald Trump, who failed all the way upward to the highest office of the land, apparently couldn't read very well because of his extremely short attention span. He never actually took the time to read over multiple page intelligence briefings, for example, and had to be told by others the Cliff Notes versions of what they said. Former Secretary of State and CEO of Earthblood dirty energy giant ExxonMobil, Rex Tillerson, would go into meetings with the angry creamsicle and was quoted as saying, "I would try different approaches with him. I used to go into meetings with a list of 4 or 5 things I needed to talk to him about, and I quickly learned that if I got to 3, it was a home run. And I realized getting 2 that were meaningful was probably the best objective." Tillerson said he would often take charts and pictures to briefings because I found those seemed to hold his attention better. If this is the general level of intellect that went on in a meeting in Biff Tannen's White House, how do you think such an ignoramus gets elected in the first place? Here's the equally wonderful comedian George Carlin, who has also left us to continue the setup.
Now, there's one thing you might have noticed I don't complain about. Politicians. Everybody complains about politicians. Everybody says they suck. Yeah! Well, where do people think these politicians come from? They don't fall out of the sky. They don't pass through a membrane from another reality. They come from American parents and American families, American homes, American schools, American churches, American businesses, and American universities, and they're elected by American citizens. This is the best we can do, folks. This is what we have to offer. It's what our system produces. Garbage in, garbage out. If you have selfish, ignorant citizens, you're going to get selfish, ignorant leaders. And term limits ain't going to do you any good. You're just going to wind up with a brand new bunch of selfish, ignorant Americans. So maybe it's not the politicians who suck. Maybe something else sucks around here, like the public.
Anti-intellectualism certainly does not represent all Americans, nor does it represent a majority of Americans, nor most humans throughout the world who don't have as much residual damage of empire by living in a militarized country which was built on the backs of slaves. Yet in the United States, our country which we love, which we can also at the same time while loving criticize, for patriotism doesn't mean you're hardline polarized in your political stance, but instead that you push back against established power structures from whatever side of the political spectrum, for the more authoritarian they are, the larger the Goliath against you. The more you must think on your own and not repeat the talking points of a specific party or ideology. However, we are constantly boggled as to how much large swaths of brain-fogged people in our native land move in lockstep to follow other really bad ideas, which go completely counter to the policies which would really help their own lives. A certain percentage of the U.S. voting populace, the minority but still a pretty large slice of the pizza, is famous for this. We set up the ratios as 1/3 of the American voting populace is devolving, 1/3 is evolving, and the other third is somewhere in between. Basically, 1/3 of America has had a long history of voting like dum-dums. 1/3 of the country would vote for Ed Gein, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Jack the Ripper, or Jeffrey Dahmer as president as long as they were anti-choice about what women can do with clusters of cells in their ovaries, and were also pro-high-capacity magazine. Since 33% are devolving and 51% is all that's needed to tip a scale in a particular party's favor within a real democracy or faux democracy, that's only 18% of the population that you need to swing the vote, the swing voters. If a future American presidential election was an ascended master philosopher with the keys to cold fusion energy versus a door handle, then the election would be razor close and usually go to the door handle. Of course, it wouldn't really be like that, as we have developed a somewhat demopublican situation, where both parties have typically sold out the working people of what we call the horizontal line of the L curve, as we discussed in a previous essay on that secret subject. Yet saying both parties are in any way the same is also not accurate either, with one party being a promoter of democracy, encouraging as many folks as possible to vote, and the other now being the anti-democratic party doing everything it can to disenfranchise the vote because it can't win when the voter turnout is high. For voter fraud is just a smokescreen to restrict voter access. Since some smaller percentage, let's say 1/4 to 1/3 of the general public is lacking intellect, who never read, there has been a long history of disdain for sanctimony within a not very well educated, low information voter public, having become almost proud of their dogmas. Much of their voting isn't for something, but purely against any amount of sanctimony. This is what Bill Hicks highlighted with the "what are you reading for" crowd, who despises anyone that says they or their country has perhaps some room for improvement, shall we say. Instead, they will say that they and those who think like them are the products of the greatest nation on earth, even though the majority of them have never had a passport or even traveled to other countries. We've been watching this happen our whole life. ever since 1980 to be exact, when Ronald Wilson Reagan, 6 letters, 6 letters, 6 letters, started the idea of people who get into government to break government to then say that government doesn't work, which is like becoming a pilot to get into flying to break planes to then say they can't fly, which notice both Hicks and Carlin also touched on in these bits, in regards to the American sea change which happened in the early 1980s. A bloody show that amplified in American politics, which many on the right end of the spectrum still hold as the greatest sea change to this day. This is a very extremist ideology that has made conservative-leaning politicians in other countries, such as in Northern Europe, look quite liberal-leaning in comparison, as they wouldn't even try breaking or removing foundational common sense services in their countries, such as free public health care or universal basic incomes. One of the most amazing and unique traits about America is that it has an amazing diversity of natural lands. There are glaciers in Alaska, desert rock formations in Arizona, marshlands in Florida, rolling wooded hills in Tennessee, a Mediterranean landscape in California, jungles in Hawaii, and rainforest in the Pacific Northwest. Yet what has decades of bad policies, meaning bad political decisions, constantly catered to the shortest term, richest special interest, lowest common denominators of public discourse resulted in culturally? What does the majority of our society, that is not the natural landscape of nature, but what is outside that, for the most part, look like? Carlin will shepherd us.
Say what you want about America, land of the free, home of the brave. We got some dumb-ass motherfuckers floating around this country. Dumb-ass motherfuckers, you know? Yeah. Now, obviously, that doesn't include this audience. I understand that. You seem intelligent and perceptive, but the rest of them, holy jumping fucking shitballs. Dumber than a second coat of paint. And this ain't just ranting and raving. This ain't just blowing off steam. I got a little evidence to support my claim. It just seems to me, that only a really low IQ population could have taken this beautiful continent, this magnificent American landscape that we inherited. Well, actually, we stole it from the Mexicans and the Indians, but hey, it was nice when we stole it. It looked pretty good. It was pristine. Paradise. Have you seen it lately? Have you taken a good look at it lately? It's fucking embarrassing. Only a nation of unenlightened half-wits could have taken this beautiful place and turned it into what it is today, a shopping mall. A big fucking shopping mall. You know that? That's all you got. That's all you've got here, folks. Mile after mile of mall after mall. Many, many malls. Major malls and mini malls. They put the mini malls in between the major malls. And in between the mini malls, they put the mini marts. And in between the mini marts, you got the car lots, gas stations, muffler shops, laundromats, cheap hotels, fast food joints, strip clubs, and dirty bookstores. America the Beautiful. One big transcontinental commercial cesspool. And how do the people feel about all this? How do the people feel about living in a coast-to-coast shopping mall? Well, they think it's just fucking dandy. They think it is cool as can be because Americans love the mall. They love the mall. That's where they get to satisfy their two most prominent addictions at the same time: shopping and eating. Millions of semi-conscious Americans, day after day, shuffling through the malls, shopping and eating, especially eating. Americans love to eat. They are fatally attracted to the slow death of fast food. Hot dogs, corn dogs, triple bacon, cheeseburgers, deep fried butter dipped in pork fat and cheese whiz, mayonnaise, soaked barbecued mozzarella, patty melts. Americans will eat anything. If you were selling sauteed raccoons' assholes on a stick, Americans would buy them and eat them, especially if you dipped them in butter and put a little salsa on them. This country is big time, pig time. Forget the bald eagle. You know what the national emblem of this country ought to be? A big bowl of macaroni and cheese. A big bowl, because everything in this country is king size. King size, extra large, and super jumbo, especially the fucking people. Have you seen some of the people in this country? Have you taken a good look at some of these big fat motherfuckers walking around? Big fat motherfuckers. Oh my God. Huge piles of redundant protoplasm lumbering through the malls like a fleet of interstate buses. They ain't got enough stupid shit at home. They just had a stupid shit sale. They ain't gonna buy more. They're going to go out in the parking lot and stuff this stuff into the big, fat, ugly, oversized SUV that's got plenty of room in it. Plenty of room in it for stupid shit and lots of room left over for these big, fat, ugly motherfuckers to get them home. Stopping, of course, for jelly roll and fried dough. These people are efficient, professional, compulsive consumers. It's their civic duty, consumption. It's the new national pastime. Fuck baseball. It's consumption. The only true, lasting American value that's left, buying things. Buying things. People spending money they don't have on things they don't need. Money they don't have on things they don't need. So they can max out their credit cards and spend the rest of their lives paying 18% interest on something that costs $12.50. And they didn't like it when they got it home anyway.
Now, Big Time Pig Time, wandering through the malls, has mostly morphed into sitting on 4x4 butts, applying fat fingers to keyboards for shopping more online. It's a society based on consumerism, amplified by 40-plus years of Reaganomic golden shower trickle-down economics, which now is about accruing debt to become pawns to commercialism and marketing. All of this is based on two fundamental misnomers of how a mature society works. The first being thinking short-term instead of long-term. The second being consumption-based instead of resource-based. The Native Americans, whose land we stole, had it right. Their tribal chiefs wouldn't make a decision if it had negative ramifications many generations down the line. Most of my life, the country I live in has seemed to care more about quarterly stock performance no matter how much environmental damage it occurs. The natives were also stewards of the land, rather than resource extractors. Those are two fundamental behavioral traits that American society needs to essentially mature beyond to think more like the native indigenous, via restructuring society from the foundation into an archaic revival of long-term stewardship. Or nature will do that in a much harsher way on our own behalf. And this can only happen by beneficial information to younger generations through learning. Carlin continues.
Not too bright, folks. Not too fucking bright. But if you talk to one of them about this, if you isolate one of them, you sit them down rationally, and you talk to them about the low IQs and the dumb behavior and the bad decisions, right away they start talking about education. That's the big answer to everything. Education. They say we need more money for education. We need more books, more teachers, more classrooms, more schools. We need more testing for the kids. You say to them, well, you know, we've tried all of that, and the kids still can't pass the test. They say, don't you worry about that. We're going to lower the passing grades. And that's what they do in a lot of these schools now. They lower the passing grades so more kids can pass. More kids pass, the school looks good, everybody's happy, the IQ of the country slips another 2 or 3 points, and pretty soon all you'll need to get into college is a fucking pencil. Got a pencil? Get the fuck in there. It's physics. Then everyone wonders why 17 other countries graduate more scientists than we do. Education. Politicians know that word. They use it on you. Politicians have traditionally hidden behind 3 things: the flag, the Bible, and children. No child left behind. No child left behind. Oh, really? Well, it wasn't long ago you were talking about giving kids a head start. Head start, left behind. Someone's losing fucking ground here.
Those who have dug in and done their own independent research on the American education system may come to learn that during the 1800s it shifted to adapt to the Prussian education system, which was characterized by compulsory kindergarten and established attendance, teacher colleges, standardized national tests, national age-graded curriculum, the fragmentation of concepts into separate subjects within fixed periods of study, all along with the state ultimately asserting a superior claim to the child over the rights of the parents. This was a radical departure in methodology and content from the previous successful traditional forms of education in America. Charlotte Thompson Iserbeith and John Taylor Gatto are 2 of the forefront names which have actively spoken out against this system. Gatto, in his book The Underground History of American Education, describes Prussian thinking at the time. The Prussian mind, which carried the day, held a clear idea of what centralized schooling should deliver. 1. Obedient soldiers to the army. 2. Obedient workers for mines, factories, and farms. 3. Well-subordinated civil servants, trained in their function. 4. Well-subordinated clerks for industry. 5. Citizens who thought alike on most issues. 6. National uniformity in thought, word, and deed. The area of individual volition for commoners was severely foreclosed by Prussian psychological training procedures drawn from the experience of animal husbandry and equestrian training, and also taken from past military experience. In the book The Prussian Elementary Schools, Professor of Elementary Education at George Peabody College for Teachers wrote the following in 1919. We believe that a careful study of the Prussian school system will convince any unbiased reader that the Prussian citizen cannot be free to do and act for himself, that the Prussian is to a large measure enslaved through the medium of his school, that his learning, instead of making him his own master, forces the chains by which he is held in servitude, that the whole scheme of Prussian elementary education is shaped with the express purpose of making 95 out of every 100 citizens subservient to the ruling house and to the state. Alexander's book clearly documented the totalitarian nature of the Prussian model, but foreshadowing the intellectual myopia of today's education establishment, he did not appear to see that an Americanized, corporatized, government-controlled education system would only be marginally better and would clearly contradict the USA's founding principles of independence, principles which called for an educated, experienced, and sovereign populace which could ultimately mature to the point of being able to govern itself. As education continued to decline in the early 20th century, in the mid-1930s, textbook publisher Robert Gunning realized that much of America's reading problem was actually a writing problem. He found that news and business writing was full of what he came to call fog, or unnecessary complexity. In 1944, he founded the first readability consulting firm. During the next few years, he tested and consulted with more than 60 newspapers and magazines. He also correlated magazine reading levels with total circulation. The lower the fog, the higher the circulation. In linguistics, the Gunning Fog Index is a reliability test for English writing. The index estimates the years of formal education a person needs to understand the text on the first reading. For instance, a fog index of 12 requires a reading level of a United States high school senior, which is around 18 years old. A formal fog index text was developed in 1952 by Gunning, which was to become commonly used to confirm that text can be read easily by the intended audience. The system came to set up that texts for a wide audience generally need a fog index less than 12, and texts requiring a near universal understanding generally need an index of less than 8. So universal understanding for everyone is at 8th grade, folks. That's pre-high school. The Gunning Fog Index measures readability based on sentence and word length. To improve your score, make your sentences and words shorter. In other words, water it down. Over time, formal publications such as magazines and newspapers of the time started using the index to keep their scores in single digits at the grade level of 9 or below. That does sound low, but most modern American publications are now writing at that level. This title of fog is ironic because it was originally identifying over complexity, but it seems to have ultimately been a backwards title, later resulting in more of a dumbed-down brain fog, meaning dullness or lack of sharpness. Now, it should be noted that Gunning was initially outraged by what his test was doing, as he hated the idea of applying a yardstick to writing. He did at one point write a scathing rebuttal, but came to surprise himself as he was weighing up each word and sentence more carefully. Gradually, he favored simpler prose. The readability test had influenced him to focus on his reader, coming to find that he agreed that a publication should always aim lower than its audience's education. An audience may be highly educated and able to understand material at a postgraduate level, yet since more sales are translated by numbers of readers, it became better for sales to keep a reading level low because of the thought process that most folks, no matter how well educated, would rather not read copy that scores much higher than 12. So eventually, the Wall Street Journal would cater to an 11th grade level. Douglas Muller, who would later become president of the Gunning-Muller-Clearwater Institute, said people prefer to read and get information at a level below their capacity. Even a Harvard University professor prefers to get information without strain. Gunning came to work with the United Press, helping bring the reading level of front-page newspaper stories from the 16th to the 11th grade. He also helped the Wall Street Journal reduce its level from 14 to the 11th grade, and in the process, the journal's circulation rocketed from less than 50,000 to more than 1 million copies in a decade. The trifecta of reading, speaking, and writing are intimately intertwined, for you can't be well-spoken and well-written without being well-read. And there is no way to have a more enlightened society full of philosophers if those three traits are not firing on all cylinders by its populace. So creating a structure that does not educate to the highest levels, on top of encouraging reading at the highest levels, will result in not a high numerator, but a low denominator, with the bar being lowered over the decades instead of being raised. And that's even with the well-educated. This is something we've personally noticed, having met many top-educated medical professionals in our wife's field who have graduated from Ivy League schools in the United States. Even they don't care to even read a dense philosophical text. Well, I went to art school and personally love diving into dense prose on occasion. Now, this is ultimately and really a separation between the autodidact and the culturally sanctioned educated, with the autodidact being a much higher degree. Terence McKenna was once asked, "How can you say the things you do? Why don't they take you away?" And his answer was, "Because I use really big words." So now the question that any student of life, and thus autodidact, for themselves must ask, why is this? Why have a society that's not in a race to the top? Our dear friend George Carlin gives the answer.
But there's a reason. There's a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. And by the way, it's the same big club they use to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged. And nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hard-working people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hard-working people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich cocksuckers who don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. At all. Yeah. You know? And nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care. That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant of the big red, white, and blue dick that's being jammed up their assholes every day. Because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it.
George Carlin was such a profound person who, through his profoundness, found a way to elevate the craft of comedy by actually having something to say, something true, such as what he and Hicks shared in their pieces and why they're two of our favorite comedians. Using the art of comedy and humor to bypass people's indoctrination and brain fog to pierce a bit through a culture of imperial conditioning. Now, there is a paramount socioeconomic structural element to Carlin's life philosophy here, which we are referencing because it's in alignment and parallel with our own personal life philosophy about class and structure, which is the identification of where the problems from modern society emanate from. One can agree that economically there is the poor, the middle class, and the rich. No matter how society is structured, there's going to be a difference in people's capabilities, work ethic, luck, etc. So even in the most fictional, enlightened society, some will have more resources and power than others, and it is important to have equality of opportunity, but certainly not equality of outcome. But it's more the ratios themselves that matter. This was discussed more in detail in our essay regarding the L curve. For in a healthy first world country, there is a strong middle class, where most people are somewhere economically in the middle, with some a bit more poor and some a bit more rich. Yet those differences are ideally not wildly different. Perhaps the poorest person has only 10 times, or maybe let's say worst case, 100 times less than the richest person. But today, the poorest people have billions less than the richest people, which doesn't sound like a first world country with a strong middle class, but instead a third world country or even medieval feudalism, with the vast majority of the populace being dirt poor and then a tiny sliver of the population being ludicrously rich. We are talking about the sliver of a sliver of a sliver of the rich that are so insanely rich and thus hold so much power over so many others that one must ask themselves how they were allowed to get that powerful in the first place. That's the world we have today, where a tiny sliver percentage of aristocratic bloodlines hold the vast majority of the power. So it's in their interest to hold that power and not empower the vast majority. This is why there has been a dumbing down of education and thus reading, writing, and speaking. With all this being said, we loop back around to the subject of politics, with two ends of a political spectrum being conservative and liberal. A definition of liberal being favoring reform, open to new ideas, and tolerant of the ideas and behavior of others. And a definition of conservative being favoring traditional views and values, tending to oppose change. Now, it's fair to say that these two definitions don't mostly classify typically modern-day conservative and liberal thought. As each will both say, the other end of the spectrum epitomizes the worst aspect of both definitions and the best definition of each on their own side. However, both of which can suffer from extreme uniformity and collectivism the more polarized each becomes against the other side. Seen in more extreme examples, such as the left-leaning Evergreen College racial equality, air quotes, witch hunt, which ate their own within academia, or the right-leaning anti-democratic Trump goon mob of insurrectionists eat their own within law enforcement, both of which became very Lord of the Flies type situations. Liberal and conservative have now come, at least in the United States, to have such foundationally different views that if you asked each the base definitions of terms, they often wouldn't even agree on those definitions. This is why any sort of debate is useless unless terms are defined, because without those being agreed upon, nothing from then on will be agreed upon. Hence the Robert Heinlein quote, "Never attempt to teach a pig to sing, it wastes your time and annoys the pig," from his 1973 book, Time Enough for Love. This context was aimed to highlight the difficulty and pointlessness of communicating a lesson that an individual is unwilling or unready to learn, seen in the train wreck mess of modern hyperpolarized politics and from the angry attitude of the stark dogmatist who is pissed off listening to this. We reject the full stop boxes of binary titles of solely left or solely right or solely liberal or solely conservative in terms of saying only one is the way or someone can accept only one or the other. In actuality, we can say we have aspects of each and may lean more one way than the other without the binary. And we ourselves, even though we try to keep our work quite apolitical, do lean ourselves sure, yet are always happy to chat to someone who may lean the opposite way in the spectrum if they're not hyperpolarized, and feel we have done so and will continue to do so many times in our public discussions. There are fabulous conservative leaners and rubbish liberal leaners. while there are also fabulous liberal leaners and rubbish conservative leaners. Yet, getting back to Carlin's philosophy, the economic aspects of class have made it so that liberal-leaning folks tend to be more artists and conservative-leaning folks tend to be more business people. And we do find the higher levels of brain fog folks in the first world are often somewhat trapped in the word spells of the robber barons and oligarchs. For much of the English language was developed around a lexicon catered to business, commerce, and resource extraction, and not stewardship, creativity, and art. Which is why it's initially easier to become more conservative than liberal, and why conservatives are typically better at delivering expedient euphemisms in speech. For conservative ideas are easier and sound better at first to the lower information voter. Yet turn that coin over, and it's often found that more liberal-leaning policies in the United States and other attempts at democracies, while seemingly harder to initially convey, work better for the vast majority of the populace. Not all rich people are bad, of course not. And not all poor people are good, of course not. And vice versa. However, the liberal class has typically spoken for the poor and middle class, while the conservative class has spoken by making the poor and middle class think that they're speaking for them, when in reality they are speaking exclusively for billionaires, mega corporations, and Israel. Big money, big corporations, and big religion. So from a foundational standpoint, we've come to realize that the difference of a more modern conservative-leaning mindset and a more modern liberal-leaning mindset, not based on their original definitions, but on how their thoughts on societal organization should continue to be structured in modernity, is that the liberal leaner thinks people are fundamentally good, and that those on the socioeconomic bottom are good, and that those at the very socioeconomic top tend to hold the majority of the corruption. While the conservative leaner thinks people are fundamentally more bad, and those who have climbed the ladder to the socioeconomic top have proven themselves good, while those in the bottom are continuing to reveal their inherent unworthiness or badness. The conservative leaner is more masculine, looking for a daddy figure to protect through militarism, and the liberal leaner is looking more for a motherly figure to shepherd and help through social services. The liberal leaners have more comedy, and the conservative leaners have more demagoguery. Liberal leaners have typically been more scientifically open in their thoughts, and conservative leaners have typically been more original sin religious. Thus, liberal leaners are more likely to focus on fixing issues with the corruption of the rich, while conservative leaners are more likely to find fault in the poor. Poor immigrants oftentimes being target number one. So since our work has always tried to speak on behalf of the individual, we the people, of all economic classes, socioeconomically from the bottom up, not protecting the top down, we the billionaires, for we identify that the vast majority, having a way to go in terms of consciousness expansion, sure, are still inherently good, but trapped within somewhat contractive special interest systems. This is why we proudly say